May God add his understanding to the reading and hearing of his holy word. There was once a magazine called Success Unlimited. I actually had a friend who received a subscription. I think it was as a joke. Each issue contained tips on how to become successful in life. Numerous success stories were told for motivational purposes. And though it was never stated outright in the magazine, success was synonymous with wealth and prominence and winning. Raises an interesting question. What does it mean to be successful, and what does it mean to be great? This is an interesting little story. Jesus and the disciples are traveling through Galilee. Jesus is talking about how he will be betrayed, killed, and on the third day rise again. And the disciples don't understand and don't ask him to explain this. They change the subject. And they start arguing amongst themselves about who's the greatest. It's really a silly argument when you think about it. What possible measuring stick could they use? Those who fish, are they greater because they provide food? Or maybe it's those who teach are greater because they provide knowledge. Or maybe doctors are greater because they heal the sick. But before we get a little too tough on the disciples, we have to realize that we have the same problem. We talk a lot about success and greatness. We have a problem with thinking that growing in faith means growing greater than our neighbor or our neighboring church. We start thinking God likes me best because my prayers are answered and yours are not. Now, we don't answer you schmo at the end of that, but we're thinking it sometimes. God likes me best. Well, at least better than you. We have a problem with this. We like the wonder of Easter, but we want to skip Good Friday because we don't like the cross. We get caught up in the joy of forgiveness, but we don't recognize that we ourselves sometimes need to be forgiven. We get caught up in thinking we've learned all there is to know, and we skip over the demands of humility. Greatness isn't what we think it is, because Jesus gives his disciples something else to think about when he talks about this whole issue of greatness. We think of greatness as my prestige, my power, my reputation, my knowledge, my plaques on the wall that tell me how great I am. But Jesus says greatness isn't that at all. It's about serving. It's about giving. It isn't powerful. It's servantful. It isn't holding back but giving away. It isn't love with strings attached. It's love without any cost at all. So if we know this, which we do, why are we not doing it? If it's so easy to be a servant, why aren't all churches doing it? Why don't we live it every day? And so Jesus uses a child as his illustration. He takes this child and he says, if anybody accepts this child, they accept me. And if we reject this child, well, you get the picture. How hard is that for us? We don't like being helpless. We don't like being childlike. We don't want to be a child. We don't want to be a child. There's an old pastor story that goes like this. A young preacher came to their first church and preached a really whiz-banger sermon. The next week, the preacher preached the exact same sermon. And then the week after that, same sermon. For a month, the preacher preached the same sermon, and then it started on the second month. Same sermon. Now the congregation's getting annoyed. What a lazy pastor. They can't even come up with something new. So they complained. They accused the pastor not only of being lazy, but of being brainless. Finally, they went to the right committee and said, you've got to put a stop to this. And the committee chair went over to the pastor and said, okay, you got to tell me, why are you preaching the same sermon every week? And the pastor said, when you start doing it, I'll move on. I will not do that, trust me. When we start doing it, Then we move on. I love this story. This is a true story about Dwight Moody. He was in Massachusetts, and there were a lot of pastors from all over the world who came to this hotel. And in Europe, in some hotels, if you put your shoes outside the door, people will come collect them and shine your shoes and then put them back at the door so you have nice, clean shoes for the next day. Well, a lot of the European pastors were used to this, so they put their shoes outside their doors, closed their doors, and went to bed. Well, Moody realized that this was not a hotel that did the shoe thing, and he didn't want to embarrass all of these pastors, so he mentioned it to some of the ministry students who were drinking coffee and watching TV in the gathering room, and he said, we need to do some work, some servant work, and they all made an excuse. Well, you know, I got to go to bed, I got to get up early, we want to be fresh for hearing you preach. So Moody went down the hall by himself and gathered up all the shoes. Now, this was not an easy process because there were a lot of people in this hotel. And he took them all to his hotel room and started cleaning and polishing all the shoes. And the next day, the pastors all got up and found their shoes had been shined and polished and cleaned and set by their doors. They had no idea that Moody had done it because he never said a word about it. But he had been seen by a friend who had just happened to open his door to go get some ice at the ice machine, and he saw Moody gathering up all the shoes. So he asked Moody what he did, and Moody told him and said, please don't say anything. Shining shoes, the great Dwight Moody as a shoe shine boy. A sense of serving and servanthood and service and humility. It takes more than just doing good works because it makes us feel good. It takes a heart that just hooks into that. We can't be last if we're pushing up ahead to be first. Now, I did have a friend of mine who say, okay, the last will be first works until there's a dinner because somebody's got to start the line. Like, you know, you got a point there. Success in God's terms is more who we are than what we have. One of the best explanations I ever heard for a servant heart is this. When I see someone who needs help, and I think about all the things I have to get done, I leave my list and am moved by God to help them graciously. That's where we are in the church. Somebody comes to us for help. Have you ever noticed that God usually brings someone to us when we are really stretched? When we have a to-do list that's 5 miles long, when our schedules are so packed full we can't stick another thing in it, and somebody pops up who needs something. And we have to admit that sometimes our first response is, oh, not another thing. Sometimes God brings people to us at inconvenient times where we're rushing around trying to get things right, where we're busy, where we don't want to stop this project right now to help someone. But that is a servant's heart who says, okay, the project will wait. I can do this. I can help this person. I think that a few times we've been servants without that twinge of, but I have things to do, Lord, can't you find someone else? Sometimes we just do it. And to be a servant, to have that kind of heart, we need to be open to God and toward others. And we need to remember that, yes, we will have those times where there is a need, and yes, it is inconvenient for us because it's not on our to-do list for today. Thank you very much, Lord. But God says, please. If Jesus was standing right next to us, would we turn to the Lord and say, sorry, Lord, I got a to-do list. I can't help one of your children today. It takes time to get that change, and we're not all there. We still go back occasionally from time to time. I love how a man named Paul Smith wrote, "Change in the church, or in yourself for that matter, is like remodeling your house. It takes longer than you ever hoped. It costs more than you ever planned and made a bigger mess than you ever thought possible. Becoming a servant takes longer than we hope." Jesus doesn't say go out and make disciples with the ones you agree with, or go out and make disciples till you're tired, or go out and serve somebody until they join the church. He just said go make disciples. And we're still learning how to be a disciple, and that takes sometimes longer than we ever hoped to change our hearts and the hearts of others. Change isn't easy, but we keep opening our hearts to the Lord, and we keep saying, "Jesus, please help me here. Yes, it's an inconvenience, but I see your face in the face of this person, and so the inconvenience falls away." Becoming a servant takes longer than we hoped. It's a learning process. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And it costs more than we ever planned. It costs more in time. It costs more in heart. It costs more in love. It costs more in everything. We want to plant the harvest, grow the harvest, and harvest the harvest all in one day. And if things don't grow to our satisfaction, we'll stand over the plant and yell at it, "Grow! Grow!" But growing something takes tilling the soil and preparing the soil and getting things right and doing the balance and planting and working and sweating and worrying and too much water, not enough water, too much sun, not enough sun. Changing the way we do things, moving out into a community we're not sure of, speaking to people we don't know. Being a servant takes longer than we hope to get our hearts going in Jesus' direction. It costs more than we planned because it takes all of us. And it makes a bigger mess than we ever thought possible. Sometimes it means success, and there are more people here than we ever imagined, and we get nervous because now we don't know people. Sometimes it means failing at something, and the plans and the dreams that we had just don't come to fruition, and we get discouraged. Sometimes it means nobody notices what we do, and we become a little discontented. Sometimes it means that we didn't get it right, and so we apologize for that mistake. I remember in my very first church, we did this big program of education center with computers so kids could come and do homework, because back then the schools weren't doing it. And there was a list in the local paper of all the churches who were helping children, and guess whose church got left off? Now, do you think, knowing me, that I responded in a spiritually mature way? Well, later I did, but right at the moment I didn't. I went, "What? How dare they leave us out? We worked really hard on this project." I was really annoyed until I remembered that it wasn't about me or about the church. It was about reaching out to those in need. And they caught us the next time, and it was fine. But I do distinctly remember being very irritated until Jesus gently reminded me that that really wasn't my job. It happens to us all. We want to be known for what we've done. But God sees, and God knows. And that's enough. We are called to be servants, to serve one another in here and to serve our community around the church, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, at our workplaces. Wherever we go, we are servants of the Lord. What is greatness? The kids gave some good answers. Justin Bieber, movie stars. That looks like greatness. What is greatness? Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. If you're going to be a servant, you may not always be noticed or recognized, but God sees and God knows. And I'll tell you, just for your interest, I've seen a lot of servanthood going on in the past couple of weeks. People just jumping in and doing what needs to be done and serving in a way that they can. And they're doing it quietly behind the scenes, and many people don't even notice. We are called to reimagine greatness because the world says greatness is people who make a lot of money and are movie stars and singers and people on People magazine. Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servants of all. Amen. The call to discipleship and blessing. Go forth as children of compassion and peace to love and serve the Lord here and in the world. Amen.